They came before sunrise, when the ocean was still a sheet of black glass and the sky wore the faint bruise of coming dawn. Villagers in the coastal hamlet of Stranwick were still tangled in dreams, unaware that death was cutting through the waters toward them. The Vikings moved without sound except for the slow rhythmic dip of oars and the whisper of wood sliding through water. Their longships, carved with snarling dragon heads, looked like monsters rising from the abyss. No war cry split the air, no horn called death to attention. They did not need noise when terror itself rode beside them. Inside one of the thatched cottages, young Elin lay awake listening to the distant rush of waves. She always awoke early, her body trained by years of tending livestock. But something in the air felt different this morning. There was a weight, as if the wind held its breath. The world was too still. Even the gulls had fallen silent. She pushed herself up and rubbed her eyes, thinking perhaps the storm that had been threatening for days was finally arriving. She had no idea that instead of rain, blood would soon fall. A scream shattered the silence, high and raw, slicing through the village like a torn soul. Elin froze. Another scream followed, then a roar, loud, foreign, monstrous. It was the Viking cry of war, the howl of men who worshipped death and believed fear was a sacred offering. She jumped to her feet and rushed to the door. Flames lit the sky almost instantly as torches landed on roofs and straw caught fire. People poured into the streets, frantic, confused, and already too late. Her father burst into the cottage, eyes wild. "Elin, to the forest now!" Before she could respond, a heavy crash hit the side of the house. The wood splintered inward and a towering figure stepped through the broken wall. He wore a wolfskin cloak, iron armor, and braids streaked with animal fat and ash. His eyes were the pale blue of frozen rivers, empty and merciless. In his fist, an axe dripped with fresh blood. He looked at Elin the way a butcher looks at livestock. Her father lunged at the Viking with a desperate shout. But it was hopeless. The axe rose, flashed, fell. The sound it made was wet and final. Elin did not scream. The shock strangled her voice before it reached her throat. Her father's body crumpled at her feet, and warmth sprayed across her hands and face. When the Viking turned toward her, she tried to run, but another warrior blocked the door. Rough hands seized her, yanking her arms behind her back. She kicked, twisted, fought, but it only made them laugh. Low, cruel laughter that tasted like rot in the air. Outside, chaos reigned. Flames devoured homes. Livestock shrieked as they burned, and families were dragged together only to be torn apart seconds later. Some men were cut down where they stood, others forced to kneel as the Vikings took delight in slow executions. Those who resisted were made examples, throats slit, bodies displayed against burning walls. The Vikings didn't just want victory. They wanted despair to take root so deep that even future generations would shake at the memory of their sails. Captured women, young, old, mothers, daughters, were gathered in the center of the village. Some collapsed to their knees, praying, sobbing, begging. Others stared blankly as if shock had already carried them to the afterlife. Children clung to mothers, only to be ripped away without hesitation. Elin was shoved among them, wrists bound behind her back with coarse rope that tore at her skin. She could taste ash in the air, hear the dying wails of her neighbors, smell burning flesh. But worse than the pain, worse than the terror was the realization sinking into her bones. The Vikings did not plan to kill her. Death would have been mercy. The raiders examined the captured women like traders studying horses at a market. They lifted faces, inspected hair, checked teeth, touched skin with hands that knew only violence. If a woman screamed or fought, they tightened their grip around her throat until she could no longer breathe, then released her to gasp like a fish suffocating on land. They wanted obedience through fear, not strength through resistance. The village elder's daughter, Sigrid, stood near Elin, trembling violently. She whispered prayers under her breath, clutching a lock of her mother's hair in her fist, the only thing she had left. When a bearded Viking with tattoos carved across his skull stopped in front of her, she flinched. He grinned and lifted her chin to inspect her face. Sigrid spat in his eyes. The moment froze. Silence stretched, even among the flames. Then he dragged her forward by her hair, lifted his axe, and without ceremony struck her down. The blow cleaved through bone, and her body hit the earth like a sack of grain. The message was clear. Defiance meant death. And death, as every woman there realized in that chilling moment, was a gift they would not be granted easily. Elin forced her tears to stay inside. Crying would not save her. She remembered her father's last words, "To the forest," and guilt cut deeper than any blade. If she had moved faster, if she had run, would she be free? Or would she have been hunted through the trees and dragged back anyway? The Vikings did not tire, did not fear, did not stop. Their hunger for terror was endless, as the longships filled with plunder, gold, iron tools, livestock, and trembling captives. The village burned to ashes. Elin was shoved onto a ship, rope cutting into her wrists as she stumbled. The deck stank of seawater, sweat, and old blood. Other women huddled together, their sobs drowned by the roar of oars slamming into water. Vikings drank and boasted about the raid, laughing as if slaughter were a festival sport. One pulled a necklace from his belt, a necklace still slick with the blood of the woman he had taken it from, and tossed it to another like a prize. Elin stared out at the shrinking coastline until it disappeared entirely. The world she knew, the fields she worked, the songs she sang, the family she loved, was gone as though it had never existed. She did not know where the Vikings were taking her, only that she was now a possession, a breathing trophy, something between a slave and a warning. Days passed at sea. Food was scarce for the captives, scraps tossed on the deck like bait. The Vikings ate meat, drank ale, and cheered under torchlight while the women sat bound, guarded and silent. Anyone who spoke without permission was beaten until they shook. Anyone who tried to jump into the sea was grabbed by the hair, hauled back and tied to the mast as the crew mocked them. They believed suffering purified captives. A woman who died by her own hand was seen as a stolen entertainment, and the Vikings despised losing amusement. At night, Elin felt the cold seep into her bones like death's slow fingertips. She could hear sailors chanting prayers to Odin, urging their gods to bless the coming trade. The women they carried would be sold, but not always for silver. Sometimes they were given as tributes to rival clans, used as offerings to forge alliances. Sometimes they were kept as spoils, tools to breed new warriors. Those not valued enough for such purposes faced fates whispered only in the darkest sagas, fates even the bravest skalds feared to sing. Elin prayed. Not for rescue anymore, but for numbness. She prayed to forget her name, her past, her father's smile. Memory was pain. Hope was poison. She looked at the horizon, and for the first time in her life, she wished the sea would swallow her whole. But fate had chosen torment for her, not release. On the seventh day, land rose ahead, jagged cliffs crowned with ancient forest and the faint shapes of wooden halls. Viking territory, their world, a place built on blood and storm wind. As the ships neared shore, warriors pounded shields and roared victory chants that made the earth seem to tremble. Villagers gathered at the docks cheering as the longships returned. Children ran to meet fathers. Wives draped furs over shoulders hardened by battle. The captured women were led off the ship like livestock. Some fainted from hunger, some collapsed in silent tears. But the Vikings' ropes never loosened. Elin stumbled across the gravel shore, her feet raw and bleeding. Every sound around her was foreign. Guttural voices, drums, the rhythmic clang of metal. Smoke curled from great halls where chiefs feasted and boasted of raids. The conquerors lived like kings. The conquered lived like shadows. They were herded into a long wooden building that smelled of old straw and despair. Women already inside, captives from other lands, stared with hollow eyes. Some had been taken seasons ago. Others so long past they no longer remembered their village names. Their bodies lived, but their spirits had been carved out long ago. Elin felt her knees weaken. A woman next to her whispered in a voice that sounded like a dying ember. Do not hope for kindness. Do not beg. Learn to be invisible. But Elin could not accept invisibility. Not yet. A tiny spark still flickered deep within her. A memory of sunlight on wheat fields, of laughter, of being loved. She did not know how long that spark could survive here. But she knew something the others seemed to have forgotten. Viking legends were about power, but history, real history, remembered everything. And somewhere, somehow, if even one story remained, the world would know that what happened to captured women was not glory. It was hell. Night fell. Chains rattled. The longhouse door shut with a heavy thud. In the suffocating dark, Elin tried to breathe, but the weight of the future pressed on her chest like a stone. She had survived fire and steel only to enter a slower death, a living one. She did not yet know the rituals the Vikings kept for women, the cruel honors they boasted of, the fate worse than death they believed created obedient silence. But she would learn. Every captive before her had, and in this land of war gods and winter wolves, the greatest battles were not fought with axes, but with the will to remember who you once were, even while the world tried to tear your name from your own mind. Elin closed her eyes and whispered her village name so she wouldn't forget. She didn't know it yet, but in the months to come that whisper, That soft rebellion would be the only weapon she had until fate offered her another. And somewhere beyond the walls, a storm gathered over the Viking land, not of weather, but of vengeance waiting in silence. The longhouse creaked through the night as though the wood itself mourned those trapped inside it. Elin lay on the straw-covered ground, wrists chafed raw by rough rope, her body aching from the journey, and her mind still echoing with screams that the sea had carried away. Around her, other women shifted in restless sleep or whispered prayers in languages she did not know. A few did not whisper or move at all. They had retreated into a silence deeper than death, a silence carved by days, months, or years under Viking hands. Morning did not come gently in this place. The first light did not paint warmth across the earth. It pierced the darkness like a blade. The door crashed open, and the clang of iron boots on the wooden floor jolted everyone upright. 2 Viking guards entered, broad as trees, laughter rolling through their chests like distant thunder. They barked orders and began separating the women, some dragged to serve in the chief's hall, some chained to labor in fields or wood yards, some chosen for the warriors' private quarters, where dignity had no breath left to cling to. Elin was pushed with a group toward the riverbank, where icy water flowed like melted steel under the pale sky. It was cold enough to strip flesh from bone, yet the Vikings ordered the women to wash before presenting them to the settlement. One of the warriors slapped a bucket into Elin's hands. "Clean," he growled in broken tongue, pointing to her blood-stained dress. She stared at the river, and for a fleeting moment she imagined throwing herself into it. The current was strong. It would drag her under quickly. A clean death, a quiet one. But as she lifted her foot toward the water, a voice whispered behind her, "Don't. The ones who try are made examples. They drown you themselves and leave your body for dogs." Elin turned and saw the speaker, a thin, older woman with silver-streaked hair, her face sharp with years of grief. Her eyes held a strange steadiness like someone who had once known power. "Who are you?" Elin whispered. "Once I was someone," the woman replied. "Now I am one of them, the forgotten." She looked at the river and added, "Survive. Even if it is only to spite them, survival." The word felt like a chain and a sword at once. The water stung Elin's skin like knives, but she washed. When she finished, her breath trembled, steam rising from her in the frigid air. Warriors inspected each woman again. Some they marked with charcoal symbols on the forearm, property of a household, property of a warband, property of a chieftain. Elin's arm was gripped by a warrior whose beard was braided with animal teeth. He smeared the mark roughly on her skin, a circle crossed by lines, meaning she belonged to the settlement chief. "Fortunate," the old woman murmured beside her. "Chief's property lives longer." Elin did not feel fortunate. She felt trapped inside another body, watching herself from somewhere far away, as though she were a story someone else was living, a twisted tale where waking was worse than dreaming. They were marched uphill to the great hall, a towering structure built of dark timber and crowned with carved dragon heads. Smoke curled from the roof vents, carrying the rich smell of roasted meat and fermented barley. Warriors lounged outside sharpening axes, laughing, boasting. They turned their heads to watch the captives pass, some with hunger in their eyes, others with cold detachment. To them, this procession was not cruelty. It was custom, right, inheritance, and triumph. Inside the hall, the chief sat atop a carved wooden throne draped in bear fur. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes as hard as forged iron. Beside him stood a woman, tall, imposing, adorned in bronze jewelry and fur. The chief's wife. Her gaze swept over the captives not with pity nor jealousy but calculation. She had seen this ritual many times. In her world, power was not offered. It was taken and defended with blood. The chief rose slowly, and silence fell. He walked forward, stopping before the line of women. He did not speak to them. He spoke to the warriors. "Strength returns from strength," he declared. "We take, and our sons will take more." His voice echoed through the hall like a law carved into stone. "These women will serve our hearths, our children, and the gods who bless our raids. Those who disobey will feed crows." A murmur of approval rolled through the hall. Elin stood stone still, eyes fixed on the ground. But the chief's wife stepped forward, and her voice cut through the air like a blade. "I will choose first." She walked slowly down the line, examining each face. When she reached Elin, she paused. Elin felt the woman's gaze burn through her, as if she could see her thoughts, her fear, her fragile spark of defiance. "Your name," the woman demanded. Elin hesitated. The Vikings often renamed captives. stripping identity before stripping freedom. To speak her name was to risk losing it, but to refuse was to invite worse. "Elin," she whispered. The chief's wife studied her. "You will serve in my hall," she decided. "Begin in the weaving rooms. A woman's strength is in hands and will. We will see if you have either." Relief and dread tangled in Elin's chest. Better this than the warriors' quarters. But slavery was slavery no matter how gilded the walls. Days bled into weeks like wounds that never closed. Elin learned to grind grain, carry water, clean the hall, mend garments. She learned to move quietly and speak little. She learned which warriors were cruel for sport and which were cruel only when drunk. She learned the names of those who had once been something: mothers, daughters, healers, singers, before their voices were stolen. The old woman at the river was named Astrid. She had once been the wife of a noble from a neighboring land, captured in a raid decades past. Now she lived like a ghost in the chief's household, a reminder that even the mighty could be broken. But Astrid carried knowledge like a hidden weapon, and she passed it to Elin in fragments. Watch everything. Yet the Vikings valued their spoils too much to let them die. Women who fell ill were forced to drink bitter brews. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were dragged up and beaten until they stood. They believed strength could be beaten into weakness, that a broken spirit was better than a free one. But something unexpected grew in Elin. Not just despair, but understanding. She saw the cracks in their world. Not all Viking women were cruel. Some looked at the captives with quiet sorrow, their own freedoms fragile under the weight of tradition. Not all warriors were monsters. Some avoided eye contact, ashamed of their culture's demands. And among the slaves, whispers of escape flickered like secret fire. It was Astrid who revealed the truth. "There is a valley beyond the northern ridge," she murmured one icy dawn. "A hidden path. Years ago, a handful escaped. If we can reach it, there are traders who will help us reach land where the Vikings do not rule." Elin's heartbeat roared in her ears. Escape. The word was dangerous. To speak, it was death. But silence was a slower death anyway. "How?" Elin whispered. "Wait. Watch. Gather what you need. Strength, timing, allies, allies." The word felt foreign, but a spark inside her had grown into flame. She watched, listened. She learned the guards' routines, the weak points in the fence near the livestock pens, the nights when the warriors drank so deeply they could not stand. And she found others. Runa, a young woman taken months before Elin who still dreamed of home. Thyra, a woman with burn scars on her arms who feared nothing because pain no longer frightened her. Even one of the Viking servant girls, Freydis, whose brother had been forced into a distant warband and who hated the world that stole him. They formed a pact, not spoken aloud, not written, but sealed in glances and breath and trembling shared courage. They would run, or they would die trying.